Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. We're continuing our conversation with George Throckmorton. In this next episode, we'll talk a little bit about authentic jerseys, bats, and balls. Are they really authentic? George Throckmorton has some really interesting insights into this. We'll also talk about how Hofmann aged all of his forgeries. George found out those techniques, and he's going to reveal those in our next episode. Check it out. I'm sure you'll really like it. I also want to remind everybody that we've still got openings for our Gospel Tangents Insiders Club. Just go to tinyurl.com/GTinsider. We'll hold a special meeting where you can talk to me and I'll talk to you. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Hofmann forgeries. Fooling a prophet for profit. So check it out. It'll be July 17th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Please sign up. It'll be a lot of fun. Now back to our conversation.
So let's talk about that. So with the aging process, how were you able to duplicate? Because I think this cracking ink was a big piece that you figured out that's how it was a forgery, right?
That was really the first time we realized something was wrong. The church let us have a room down in their library. And we got a special lock put on it just to make sure they wouldn't come in after hours. I mean, I shouldn't say we didn't trust them, but we didn't. All of the rumors going there about how they're hiding things and trying to hide things, and I would walk in and people would, in fact, later on, the director of the library down there, as I went in, he would say, "George, you realize the people here don't like you, don't you?" And I says, "I know that." He says, "That's okay, you can have anything you want." Because they didn't like to see me come in. They had accepted these as documents. I had a very high, a person of, what can I say, he's published many books. He's not alive anymore. I'm not going to use his name, but when I called him to talk to him on the phone, he started hollering at me over the phone, telling me I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to blackmail somebody, Mark Hofmann, and Mark Hoffman's honest and all this other stuff, and I finally hung up on him. I got tired of hearing him holler at me. But historians are the same way. They examine a document. They determine it's genuine, but from their own perspective, not from a scientific analysis. And although the church tried, and they did, President Hinckley had a document he personally paid to get authenticated, and he sent it. Who is the best document examiner? Well, there's two people back east, one in Boston, one in New York, and they send them back, and they got them authenticated. Who are they going to believe? I mean, they've been known. The one fellow back in New York, he published 12 different books, I think it was, on how to detect a forged historical document. He's considered by himself, if nobody else, to be the greatest document examiner in the world, and had for years. He was 80 when I met him. Wonderful man, he really is. But he didn't know the first thing about a chemical analysis and the significance of it. And so the church tried the best they could to find people they thought could authenticate documents, and they got them authenticated. It's just they weren't using the right techniques. And they didn't know, because we're a document examiner, forensic document examiners. We don't deal with historical documents. But when we had to, we started applying the scientific methods, and we found out that their methods were all wrong.
So, this brings up a point. There's a TV show, I know my dad loves to watch it, called Pawn Stars. And, they'll bring, a lot of people will bring in stuff into the pawn shop, and then they will bring in a historical expert and say, is this legitimate? Are those sorts of things legitimate analyses?
Over the years, they had that come to Salt Lake a few years ago. I don't know if you're aware of that. Mm-mm. And the person that they brought in to authenticate documents owned a bookstore downtown.
Oh.
That was their expert. I've also, over the years, I've done a lot of work on sports memorabilia. I had a Babe Ruth jersey that was selling for $750,000.
Oh my goodness.
That had been authenticated. But it wasn't, because the ink that was used to sign it wasn't made until Babe Ruth died in 1948, and the ink wasn't made until 1972. So if it had been genuine, he would have had to have been resurrected and signed his name again. But I met with a lot of these people that authenticated it, and I found out they count a baseball, for instance, has to have mud on it. I didn't know that. Any Major League Baseball, they rub it in the mud from Cooperstown or wherever it is where baseball was invented. That's still a tradition. So they look for residue of the mud. They count the number of stitches in the ball. because they change the stitches periodically as they manufacture it for that particular year. And that's how they're doing it. Well, I don't know anything about that. That's not my expertise. Historians, when they look at documents, they look at the content of it. What does it say? What else was going on historically at that particular point? That's how they authenticate it. When I testified about the salamander letter in court, I had never read the contents of it. I didn't know what it said other than what people had told me. In fact, to this day, I don't know whether I read it, but I think I did, just out of curiosity. But we don't look at what the words are. We look at the ink, the strokes, the paper, things like that, the absorption rate. And so everybody has their own expertise, and the only way you can really get it accurate is if you have all these various branches of science go in and look at it. And that's too expensive to do if your document's only going to be $100 and you're going to spend $5,000 to get it authenticated. By the way, the fellow that authenticated the salamander letter, his fee was $6,000 to authenticate it.
Wow.
Outrageous in my humble opinion, but he did things I never knew of.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, did that answer your question?
But
anyway,
basically,
for shows like that,
they're probably not really good analyses, is that?
Not really. And the sports shows, sports memorabilia, they use a different thing than we do. They tried hiring a document examiner. Some of these sports shows did. Ted Williams, for instance, would make $100,000 a day, which was more than he earned in a year while he was working, to go down and sign autographs. And they tried to hire one of our people to go down there and give certificates of authentication. They couldn't find him because we have to provide a thorough examination. So every signature is going to take 1 to 2 hours to do an examination. And, you know, how many hundreds or thousands of these certificates are issued a day? So we told them we wouldn't do it. So they went out and hired one of the others that is not trained properly, but still claims to be a document examiner, and they don't know the difference.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of that goes on.
Wow. So, I mean, can we have a lot of faith in any of these historical documents?
Years ago, I was interviewed in 60 Minutes back in New York.
Oh, wow.
They called me back to look at some sports memorabilia. And I thought it was kind of funny, and I didn't know it was as significant as they did, but they always had a part where you would have one final statement before they ended the program, and they said, what's your advice to people that goes out and buys sports memorabilia? And I made the comment, I says, I would suggest that they pay as little as possible because it's probably forged anyway. And that's how they ended the program. And the New York Times did an article that says about 7 out of 10 sports things are forged.
Really?
And I did some work for the FBI years ago, Cincinnati, where they broke into a guy's house and he had in his garage, he was forging sports memorabilia on anything, baseballs, bats, uniforms, cards. He had a machine that did it. It's called an auto pen. And so I wouldn't be surprised if 7 out of 10 are forged.
Really? It's that high?
Now, I don't know how much it is on historical documents, but
on sports memorabilia, it's probably that.
That was the estimate they gave.
Wow.
I don't doubt it.
That's crazy.
In fact, that's one of the reasons I worked for an auction house out of California, and they didn't like me after a while because everything they would send me was forged.
Really?
Every single document they sent me was forged.
Oh my goodness.
Well, that's not good. You can't sell it. When they want to sell that Babe Ruth jersey for $750,000 and it's forged, they lost a lot of money on that transaction.
Wow.
Because, they get a percentage of that when they try to sell it. So.
Well, I understand that even there's a market for some of Mark Hofmann's forgeries now.
Oh, sure. But not $1.5 million.
Right.
I think the salamander letter sold for, I think it was either 40 to 60, somewhere in that. And I don't know where it is now. I don't know who owns it, but I know it's not worth that much.
Wow. So was it you or was it Bill that came up with this, I think it was ammonia residue or something?
Oh, I'm sorry. I got sidetracked. I get sidetracked so much. You asked me how we detected it. We got this room. The church let us have a room, and as I said, we put a lock on it, and every night, or every morning, they would bring us the documents. I put them in my briefcase. I locked the briefcase. with the documents they brought me. And at night, I would take it up and put it back in their safe, and I would handcuff it to one of the pipes so they couldn't get to it. I mean, that's the trust we had back then.
Wow.
And as we was looking at the documents for anything, we didn't know what to look for. We didn't look at historical documents. And Bill would look at some, and I would look at some, and we had a microscope, we had an ultraviolet light. And I started noticing some things. I don't know what Bill was looking at, quite frankly, but we were 2-3 feet apart is all. We were in the same room, which was locked, and nobody had access to that. We had a special lock put on. We was the only one that had a key. And we spent 2 weeks in that room, Bill and I did. And in the process of that, we're looking at documents and requesting more, and then we would ask the head of the library there the significance, the history, and so forth. And there was one document I was looking at, and I noticed, I call it my Rosetta Stone, because it was a document which would probably, a historical document on purchasing some land which later became Nauvoo. And I noticed that there was different things on that one document. There was different inks, different pens, and as I put an ultraviolet light, there was some part that would reflect back and other parts that would not. And that really caused me some question. Why? If this document has been saved for over 100 years, why would you have some part that glowed and some part that did not, different inks and so forth? And as I looked at it closer, I noticed the thing that made the document valuable was not the deed itself, but the fact that it says obliged Joseph Smith. And where it said obliged Joseph Smith was where I saw different ink and I saw this white effect going around. And I asked, that night I asked him, I says, can you tell us where this came from? Because before we started noticing some of these documents had a blue haze on the documents under ultraviolet light. Others did not. And so we separated them into 2 piles. And as I looked at those under the microscope, I noticed there was a characteristic of the ink would crack on some of them and not others. And then I noticed the ones with that blue haze were also the ones that had the cracked ink. And so I told Bill, I says, I think we got something here. And I handed him a stack of documents. And I says, you give them to me, mix them up, give them to me, and I'll tell you which one came through the hands of Hofmann. Then he gave it to me, and I looked under the microscope, and I says, this one did. He gave me another one, this one did not, and so forth, until we were through. And all of them that had the cracked ink had Hofmann's signature, or had Hofmann. He had either donated it or sold it to the church or something. The others had not come through Hofmann, except for one document, and that was the one I mentioned, where there were 2 different types of inks and so forth. And so that night, as we was getting ready to leave, I asked the librarian there, I says, could you tell me, did this come through the hands of Hofmann? And he said, no. Well, that shot our whole theory. And so we went home, and I was very discouraged. The next morning, we went there, and he again took me up and brought me back from the safe. And he said, oh, by the way, that document you gave me, that did come through the hands of Hofmann. And we thought, we've got it. And then that was our first clue, the blue hazing and the cracked ink, and this one that had both on them. That was our Rosetta Stone. All of these Hofmann handled, these he did not.
Wow.
And from there on, then we started doing experimentation. What caused the ink? That's what Bill took. What caused the blue ink or the blue hazing? That's what I took.
Okay.
And so it's a matter of research, study, and experimentation.
So how long after the bombs were October of '85, right?
Correct.
How long until you discovered this blue hazing and cracked ink?
That was about March. And that still wasn't sufficient because we continued researching until June.
Okay.
Before we really started catching on. And even then, we didn't find the chemicals, for instance, from the toy store. We didn't find that for 5 more months.
Wow.
This investigation took us 16 months full time. That's how long I was involved in it.
Wow. So how long before Hofmann went to trial then?
He, again, the bombs occurred. He wasn't arrested until, I think, January, because he was still recovering. And the district attorney had somebody watching him all the time. He had a car up at his house watching him and so forth. And the preliminary hearing, and to me that's just a lesser trial. There's no jury, but It's a trial, it's a full-fledged trial, except the judge presides and determines whether it should go before a jury or not. The preliminary hearing lasted either 4 or 5 weeks, and that started in May. And I know that because there was nothing I could do. They wouldn't let me in the courtroom, and so I took my family and we flew back to Florida and went to Disney World back there for a week. We got us some good cheap fares.
Oh, good.
So I was gone for a week during that period of time, but and I testified, and Bill came up and testified, I think about the 3rd week.
So, yeah, because there was a preliminary hearing. So that was in January of
May.
86? May of 86. So that's when the preliminary hearing
Yes.
was. I know we talked on the phone a little bit about the FBI. Can you talk a little bit about your interactions with them?
Yeah, I'm retired now, so I can. The FBI had authenticated several of these documents. And anybody in law enforcement knows you don't mess with the FBI. And Bill Flynn actually knew the examiner of the FBI that examined the Salamander letter. When I started in the investigation, I had to visit several of the laboratories. For instance, I visited the Secret Service laboratory and the FBI laboratory and the New York State crime laboratory up there, to visit with people and look at some of the documents that they had that we did not have access to. And I can give you an example the same. I knew when I was working at the Institute of Applied Science in Chicago in 1970, I met a man by the name of Tony Cantu. He worked for the Secret Service. Him and 2 other people were responsible for doing all of the publications, research, and so forth on ink. This is the 3 greatest ink experts in the world.
Oh, wow.
Tony and I became friends. And that's good. Because when I had to go back to New York, for instance, and look at the Oath of a Free Man, the original, they wouldn't let us see it out. They wouldn't send it out there because it was worth too much money. They didn't want to let it go. So I actually called one of the people at the lab, and he kept hanging up on me. As soon as he found out it was me, he would hang up. And so I hadn't contacted Tony yet. I was talking to another fellow that Tony worked with on all his research. Anyway, so I got the Attorney General to contact the Attorney General of New York. And he authorized me to go back and look into the state laboratory so I could look at this document. Because again, it's $1 million. They didn't want to let it go. So I flew back there and I went in the lab right after lunch, and the fellow that had the document and so forth and was the director of the lab wasn't in at the time. He was out to lunch. So I was sitting there, and as he walked in the door, I stood up. The secretary said, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so, this is Mr. Throckmorton." And he had his hand out towards me, and then as soon as he heard the name, he pulled it back. He turned around and went in and slammed the door in back of me. Somebody else had to bring the document out because they had already authenticated it. And no 2-bit hick from Utah is going to come out and contradict him. I went down to Washington, D.C. to look at some of them, and I met Tony, and he was with me all day long. We went around, and I'm glad he was. We would go in the FBI lab, and as soon as they walked in, "Hi, Tony, how you doing? It's good to see you. Hi, this is George." And they would all turn around and walk away. Secret Service lab was the same thing. When we called for help, they wouldn't talk to us because we're contradicting what the FBI had said, and other laboratories too. And that lasted actually until 1987 in October. So we were blackballed for over a year and a half, and finally we met in Palm Springs, California. We met for 3 days to discuss how Hofmann did his forgery with the forensic examiners from around the country. And we wanted the FBI to come because everybody knew they had made a mistake. Hofmann had already confessed, and we met our own regional organizations, and we'd put on programs there. Everybody knew the FBI had made a mistake. So we wanted them to come out and tell us what happened, because they don't make mistakes. They really don't. But in this case, they did. And so they finally agreed to come down to Palm Springs where we had our meeting. The meeting we had in the Gene Autry Hotel down there was good because there were 3 FBI agents meeting with me in the room. And I told them, we don't want to embarrass you, but we need to let the other examiners know what went wrong so they don't make mistakes. And we would discuss a plan, and then one agent went in the other room and called Washington and come back and said, nope, we can't use that approach. We tried another one, he went back, and finally on the third one he came back and said, okay, that's the approach we're going to make our presentation. And from then on they had some ill feelings towards us, but they at least cooperated.
Wow. That must have been pretty interesting to take on the FBI.
It was a very traumatic period of time. I couldn't even talk to my wife about these things, and that was what was frustration. Everybody said we were wrong. Everybody said we were wrong. But Bill and I, thank goodness for Bill, I would have caved in, I would have said, I don't care, and quit. I think I probably would have. But because of the support I had from him, and we knew we were right, it's just how are we going to convince him? That's why it took so long on the Salamander letter. It wasn't enough just to come up with a couple of things. There were actually 7 different things that combined together refuted what the FBI said. For instance, the paper. Mark, it was genuine paper. He stole it out of a book up at the University of Utah. He stole out one of the back or front fly leaves, I don't know. But so they couldn't trace it back to the book. He went through and he drew lines on the paper.
Oh, wow.
So it was lined paper. And so the FBI would look at it, oh, this is lined, this is not, let it go. Remember the postmark. The FBI saw the postmark, but they never looked at it to see if it was real or not. They just saw the postmark. They said it cost 6 cents to be mailed. It was addressed to the right person. It was folded properly. It was sealed with sealing wax. The paper was genuine. So they thought it was genuine. But we found out that the sealing wax was counterfeited. It was a combination of things. We found out that the paper was actually lined with pencil. And as I was measuring the lines, they were not parallel. They were close. He used a ruler. I used a ruler that's good within 1/25th of an inch.
Oh, wow.
125th of an inch under the microscope. And I found out they weren't parallel. They had to be parallel if they were printed, but the FBI never looked at that. So those are the things that we looked at. And finally, between the 7 of them, we found it was enough that the FBI finally consented, reluctantly, but they consented. It was forged.
Wow, that's crazy. That's awesome.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with George Throckmorton. In our next conversation, we'll talk about the third bomb and the crime scene. George will describe it.
And he carried the bomb with him down to the mall. We know he was there for at least an hour and a half carrying the bomb because he had gone into a local store and made a purchase there, and it had the time on the receipt that was in his pocket. So we know he was there. And then I think what happened, and we have to speculate, but it seems pretty good, when this person didn't show up, then Hofmann left. He walked back up to his car, which was a low sports car. As he opened up the car door, he's still carrying the bomb. As he sits down in the seat and goes to put the bomb on the passenger seat, it hit the gear shift knob and caused it to tip, and it blew him out of the car.
I hope you enjoyed that short clip from our next interview. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please go to our patreon.com/gospeltangents and subscribe for just $5 a month. If you'd like a transcript of this, please click the yellow subscribe button at gospeltangents.com, and I'll send you this and all future transcripts. Also, if you'd like a paperback like we've got here, those are available at our website at amazon.com. Just do a search for Gospel Tangents. Please get all updates at our Facebook page at facebook.com/gospeltangents. We're also on Twitter at Gospel Tangents. You can also get transcripts individually at our website, gospeltangents.com/shop. Finally, make sure that you subscribe on our Apple Podcast page. Just do a quick search for Gospel Tangents there and give us a 5-star review while you're at it. Thanks again for listening. Your support helps create more Mormon history classes and podcasts such as this, and so I really appreciate you listening. Please share with your friends. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some more of our great videos. Thanks again.